runs may increase.
Number of runs may increase. You know, we do have a large amount of our calls to Washington Township are automobile accidents just because of the distance of 46 and the lack of residential homes. So we do run a lot of those in that area. That service is going to continue, obviously, no matter what. An annual, basically, we take out the hose testing and the pump testing as well as part of that cost. That's an annual thing that's done on all trucks. So we do incur cost. Some of them are more fixed than not. The question is do we add and I know your feeling is yes, do we add the cost of personnel in there? And if we do, then how many personnel do we add? State law, federal law, and federal standards are that you have a minimum of 4 people, not 3 people, on a structure fire. You have to meet 2 in and 2 out before you can do anything. So if we run with that 4 number, then it's going to give us a number much vastly higher than that $140,000. So if we can decide if we want to include personnel into there, because it's an insurance policy for anybody that uses the fire department. Do we do that or not? Because those people are already there providing a service to the city of Greensburg. It's an added benefit for the township. Do they pay 20% of that person? Do they pay 50% of that person? Do they pay any of that person?
Well, not to take any position one way or the other, but I would certainly urge that if you were going to do that, you would need to do that to every township you answer to. If you're going to attribute a portion of your personnel to a township, it would certainly seem equitable to do it to all of the townships and not simply the one that is here.
What I'm saying is we added 3 firefighters to the rolls based on a contract and an agreement. Now, we haven't increased that dollar amount, but we did add 3 firefighters to it. And we need to think long and hard. If we're going to decrease that number to 50,000, if that's what we've agreed to and we say that's what we're going to do, then we need to figure out where that other 90,000 is coming from, and that might mean we're going to have to take 2 personnel away to cover that cost, because the money doesn't just show back up. We've got to cover that cost somewhere.
Oh, absolutely.
It's got to be somewhere. And so if we decide we want to go into this contract and we want to go in that agreement and we're okay with losing $90,000 a year, which it's October, in the middle of October now, with the anticipation we were going to get $140,000 for the year, that's, we've budgeted that, we've paid those personnel for that. Now, if that's the case, then I don't think we have any other choice other than to say, all right, not that we need to go and cut a person or 2, but if we lose people, we don't replace them, because we have to make up that cost somewhere, and we don't really have anywhere else to make it up at. They were added, I think it was our 13th, 14th, and 15th firefighter were added to the rolls, was what I was told based on this contract.
Is that documented anywhere?
I was told basically by his historic, right? All right, I don't have the document on it.
Right.
But we added
be,
fire.
right? You would think, if you would.
But the contract doesn't read it's absolutely for firefighters.
So it's more of a gentleman's
It was more of an
agreement.
agreement that we'll add these people, you provide that monetary value to help pay for them.
We could potentially acquire Board of Works minutes from whatever year that was.
Because I have.
A long time ago.
Try to track that down.
If-
Brenda's office can find some deep stuff.
If I have a list of what we could do to cut costs. Even though the money doesn't go to the general, or goes to the general fund, not the fire, and if the fire department has to accrue all $90,000 of the cut, we're looking at laying off our newest employees, not rehiring.
I'm not
any
suggesting we lay off a
positions.
single person. I'm saying as attrition takes its toll, we don't replace.
And I'm just giving you a list of things that I have come up with to help save money. That includes closing a station and moving apparatus, selling apparatus, laying off our fire inspector. And then that is included with decreasing our training, any projects that we had, and then just making small budget cuts here and there. Unfortunately, those you gotta do a lot of to do that. It's your personnel, whether it's through attrition, whether it's closing station 2, selling a spare apparatus to refund some of that money, and then not having the cost of that. I don't believe anybody wants to close a station or anything
So
like that.
what you were saying in essence is that as we're trying to get the city of Greensburg to grow, and we're trying to get all these awards, then we're gonna turn around and cut the fire safety and make it more dangerous for our citizens.
I think
I
you're
was-
misinterpreting what I'm saying or twisting.
No, I
words.
didn't say
But
you.
the other,
About
okay,
patience.
okay, yes,
It's a
sir.
virtue. I worked real hard to get Station 2. Okay? And I'm not sure we're getting full benefit out of it right now. We have a Honda train coming through 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Do we have, you know, the question is whether we have enough personnel to handle a problem on the south side of the tracks. If there is a fire, it might be 20 or 30 minutes before we get a vehicle there. You're talking about cutting people. We got less people working, more stress for the firefighters. They're shooting themselves in the foot. We can't begin to think about cutting people who are working in our safety organizations like police and fire. We can't even go there. The thought shouldn't even come up.
If we can't pay for them, we can't hire them. That's $90,000 over this 2-year
Jamie,
contract. It's
I'm talking about the
$180,000.
people that we currently have. I'm talking about laying people off.
No, that's not, I'm not even considering that as an
But
option.
he mentioned it. That's where I'm going. What I'm speaking to had nothing to do with what you said. I'm speaking to his comments, what he could do to help. And I'm saying, I don't like his ideas. But I also know this, he doesn't like his ideas either. But he's saying that's a possibility. I don't want that possibility to exist. The safety of the people in the city of Greensburg is paramount. There's nothing more important than we do in this board. The most important thing, the lives of our people.
And I concur, I think, that's, all those things he mentioned are just going backwards, and we don't wanna do that. For sure. And Jamie's right, we gotta figure out how we're gonna come up with this money. So my question is, let me back up for a minute. I concur with Jamie, or Mr. Kenny, to come in October and present us a contract for 2020 when we had reasonable expectation that things weren't necessarily gonna alter that much, is a bit of a, as he said, the AT put a slap in the face. I think it's a bit insulting. So, I'm not sure that 50,000 for this year is appropriate at all. I'm not sure what the number is, but 50,000 is very inappropriate. Going forward, in terms of cost to cover the cost of Washington Township, it's important that we maintain this relationship. It's been positive. It's important that we have safety for not only Greensburg, but our friends and neighbors in Washington Township, as well as our friends and neighbors throughout the county. So I don't want to change anything with regard to that. I mean, that's not my intent at all. But my question is, the township has been able to provide this sum of money as a good faith effort to help provide for our costs, enable the city to provide coverage throughout the township. Why is it that it has to change? I mean, apparently, they've been able to do this and also at the same time amass considerable sums of money in order to pay for the replacing of the equipment that need to be replaced. So I don't understand why it can't be, why it has to be so dramatically changed here. I don't understand that.
It would take another 30 years at that rate to build back up to the cost of ever increasing apparatus. So that's why if we lowered it, we would be able to save up funds to replace apparatus sooner, as opposed to wearing their life completely out. This tanker is from 1985.
All right, and that's reasonable. I'm not unreasonable. Sometimes people get the impression I am, but I'm not.
I know.
Then let's figure out something that's, because that's a reasonable response. Maintaining cash balances is not. Building up dollars, of course, I don't know, I guess you can hold on to them in your fire fund. The Cume fund is for that building of savings, so to speak. Knowing that some of those dollars are going to be used for, to help cover some other expenses that the department might have, that would be appropriate, might make sense. So I'm willing to entertain a change to that 140,000.
May I, you have both said something, and this is now the second meeting, and with the permission of you two gentlemen, I'd like to clarify something, because I think it's necessary to clarify with regards to the timing of this. Do I have your permission to do so?
Yeah.
This didn't start in October. Like, it's not like we haven't been negotiating this for months. I mean, taking out the COVID time period, we started the city and the township began these conversations back at the beginning of the year. So what was brought to you was a negotiated item. Like, it was brought to you as a negotiated term. The negotiated term was, he wanted to do X. The mayor still wanted to maintain Y, which is the $140,000. And they negotiated a term that allowed that to happen. And I wrote it down. So to say that, well, you just came to us in October and did this, which, as I mentioned, I'm writing in my little mental journal that I will never do this again without having more stakeholders involved in the conversation. But that is not a 100% accurate statement. And I'd like the record to simply reflect that this was brought to you in October, but it was negotiated for a significant period of time prior to that. That's all.
Let me know stuff.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the fire truck purchase, the baby box, and now the bonds have all sort of been blocked in COVID. Has blocked circumstances. Yes, it is delayed, and we've had that conversation as well. So yeah, Chris is accurate. We have been working on it. We do a lot of stuff. I mean, this is my full-time job and your full-time job, and we do a lot of stuff. But it is time sensitive. I think we've had a conversation about this year's monetary compensation, and I think we kind of learned that for sure.
Well, and I also think it may be helpful to the board members to know, yes, you lowered that number from 140 to 50, but there's a reason why you made that decision, correct?
Yes, we can rebuild cash balances.
But it also has to do with the allocation of the funds to the unincorporated portion versus the incorporated portion, correct? So I think that may be beneficial for them to know as well.
So when you came last month, you asked about the bond
Yes.
to the council.
Right.
And that was supposed to cover everything, which that contract A, of one,
Right.
had that, the 140, so we could keep our cash income in.
Right.
But it asked for approval of the bond.
Right.
And since then, you've had discussions with your finance people, you think that that's changed some.
Yeah.
But This contract assumes that you don't keep that. Because the people inside the incorporated areas will not have the tax implications apparently, according to the agreement that already was. So you're trying to make up that difference.
Right.
As a portion.
So, in effect, we're, by not having the city pay the tax, city residents pay the tax, indirectly we're paying for it by not being reimbursed for what we expected.
We're not collecting as much money,
Yeah,
but at 50,000, we are covering our expenses.
My comment from before was, yes, this contract has been here for decades, but has it been fair for decades? The city's getting, it seems like, a much better end of the deal.
Well,
They get millions of dollars of trucks that they get to use in the city. They get $140,000 a year that more than double covers the cost of coverage for the township.
when the township gets the coverage, and then some. So it wasn't unfair, it was a matter of trying to provide, at least whenever they initially had to set it up, they thought it was fair, that they were getting an appropriate, service for what they were paying. You know,
It's almost like buying a car. You're willing to give a certain much, and the other person says it's worth more. And I think that the statement that Dee makes is clarifies that point, okay? What is their service worth to the city of Greensburg?
or what is
And
it
then
worth to
Christian's
them?
asking, you know, what is Greensburg's assistant worth to Washington Township? It goes both ways.
Yeah, it does, and
So,
I'm not saying we
what-
can't make an adjustment, I'm just saying I think the adjustment is
Well, I mean, I think if you take just the allotment of number of runs based on the percentage of runs and the overall cost of the department, it was $120,000 a year. So if we say 50,000 is fair, then when 120,000 was really the prorated cost per run, then if 50,000 is fair, then the chief's saying he can cut his budget by 2/3. Is what he, right, or at least 40% maybe. So I just, you know what I
With that
mean?
number, but again, the options there aren't great.
No, I'm just saying, if we look at it as a percentage of total runs, and we have to do all the training we have to do, maintaining the equipment, right? All of that, and then having the personnel on staff, I think that 120 number sounds a whole lot more reasonable, and I think that if you justified it in that way, I think it makes a lot more sense, but
Well, that's also
I don't think that's
assuming-
being unfair to the township. Go ahead.
That's also assuming that you spend 100% of that budget of the fire. Do you spend 100% of your budget every year?
I try.
Right.
He's coming and asking for additional appropriations, so,
Yeah.
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 So-
And I agree, Jamie. I think one thing that I would like to see at least help from my, as we talk numbers, is guidance from somebody, whether it's the Board of Works or whether it's just yourself or Chris, is what formula do we want to use to figure this out? Because that formula would then fluctuate depending on whatever you use. You talk about including personnel, or we talk about, you know, we can do numbers this way and get 120. We talk about flat costs with no personnel, it's a much lower number. So to standardize things and to help my predecessors and people in my place that I train up as well, here is the dollar, this is how we figure how this part of this contract works. There's always going to be negotiation to it, but where is a dollar, what type of formula do we use to at least get us to a base number? Is that fair?
No, that's fair, I get it.
You know, and I think
I
that, you
hear
know,
what you're saying.
I agree the 120,000 sounds good, I don't wanna make those cuts. I don't wanna have to make those cuts, because if everybody said it is regressing, not progressing. I don't think anybody wants the fire department to have to do that. But when asked, what do you cost, this is it, because I have no guidance, I have nothing to go on to say, well, here's the formula that you use. If I had a formula to use, we could have come up with a different number. But yes, 120,000 would be, that loss is then negligible
Right,
almost in line item stuff per se.
we can figure that out, and I think that.
For sure, that's
yeah.
easy to absorb, maybe even in multiple departments instead of just one potentially.
Absolutely.
Does the board feel that it is inclined to help the township, so we can, let's say we can absorb 20,000? No problem, that's not, it is a problem, but no problem. So now our new number is 120. So does the board feel that it is in the city's interest to be helpful to the township to reduce that another factor, to 100 or 90 or whatever, as goodwill and partnership towards recouping asset expenditures?
I guess what I'd like to see is maybe if we could do a 120 for this year and for next, because we've already put our budget together. Before we have our budget meetings, let's come up and decide if there's something else that we think is more appropriate to help you maintain the money that you need over time to build up funds for future trucks. And maybe, you know what I mean, and then that way, at least going into our budget season, we know what's really there. We can appropriate and ensure that we've got the funds to make sure we're gonna pay for our firefighters, right, that are there and those kind of things. But at the same time, still make sure we're getting you what you need as well, because we wanna make sure that's there. That's just maybe my opinion.
And I certainly wouldn't oppose that. I agree. But I know Jamie does, and I also, but I'm sure Dr. King does, I'm not gonna speak for you, but I'm assuming that we all want to maintain this thing. And we wanna try to find a way to do it that's, gonna be beneficial to both parties. Fair and equitable. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I'm not certainly supporting that. I'm willing to even make another thought with regard to your point of doing something a little further if we needed to. I'm willing to consider that for this year and for next year. But I think this is a temporary thing. I think something that needs to be looked at and needs to be not negotiated so much as thought through and come to a consensus on is how do we, what is a fair way, notwithstanding the mutual aid, that's another whole kettle of fish that's for the benefit of all. But this is, we have an obligation, we don't have an obligation necessarily to go to, Westport. They may not call us, but we have an obligation to go to Washington Township. That's pure and simple. So we need to find a way to figure out how we're going to, what's a fair and equitable way for the township to help pay for fire service. Because if, it's an obligation that the trustee has, he needs to have it done. The citizens of Washington Township want it done in the most expeditious and the most professional and the best way possible. Nothing against any of the other fire departments, but as Jamie said, we're a professional fire department. We're gonna get there much quicker than people that have to drop what they're doing and come. And we're probably the most equidistant, we could probably get there just in terms of logistics. Not even if there was another if you were a volunteer fire department, we could get there quicker than some other fire
Unless there's
department.
a train.
Because of, what?
So unless there's a train.
And we've got something on the south side.
Yeah.
It was, there's something there to at least start with. So, I guess what I'm saying is that, yes, let's see if we can find something, but I think the 50,000 is just a bit too much, given what we could reasonably expected and could reasonably expect. And it's all in consideration of this bond, which, if there was an emergency and you had to borrow the money, that's another question, but it's not. You've got the safety, it's there, it's been there, it was accumulated for these purposes. I'm not sure that, and again, that's your decision, I understand, but I'm not, if I was a township president, I'm not sure I'd be so keen on paying interest on something that we've already got money to buy, and that if I was a part of that, had been saving up to do. So,
So, Christian, go ahead.
Again, the portion of the bond, the reason for that is to save that to possibly assist with other large purchases going forward and take advantage of the low
and,
interest
and
rates.
that
all of
might
that.
be,
And
but
it's-
that's an issue that's on down the way, that shouldn't be part of this. Because there's no guarantee that's needed, or it's gonna be in our best interest. We don't, those are all, that's pieces of information, that we don't have that information too. And that requires a good bit of discussion and discernment before a decision can be made.
I thought it was brought up that there was a need for a ladder truck.
Chief Stoermer's talked about the ladder truck several times, and it's as part of our long-term capital improvement plan in 22, 23.
Which is in only 2 years. Are you gonna be able to recoup
Before.
enough to get that
Yeah.
2 years?
And that may
Just
be a
kidding, just
reason
kidding,
to-
just kidding.
That may be a reason to then borrow. But that will be then.
Just a joke.
The, so Christian, not necessarily to put you on a spot, so this board has determined 120,000 seems to be equitable. Do you have a number that you would consider your best, and you may not be able to answer this in a moment, but if we could accept that, but to be your best solution to accomplishing what you would like to accomplish at continuing through this partnership?
Well, I guess the question back is, are you saying that you're saying 120 is not your best and final offer?
I'm saying that I don't want to make 120 a stumbling block that causes everything to crash.
Okay, so I have a, township board meeting coming up, and I can discuss and get, approval for that, for, what would be our best and final offer,
When is your township?
October 20th.
And I guess my suggestion on that is that we come to an agreement at least for this year and for next. And then I'm not saying that maybe if that number is more appropriate going into 2022, but my concern is we've already budgeted for next year. We budgeted with the understanding or the expectation that that was gonna be the agreement. Right?
Yes.
And so now we've got salaries and other things that are depending on that. And I know when we did our budget this year, we were in the green, but we weren't in the green by $90,000. We were squeaking into the green, right? So we were trying to balance that budget and make sure that those things happen. And so my concern is, we might be able to find some money to reallocate, or maybe we don't spend all the money in certain budgets, but I know that that's a stretch, and there's no other, like the chief mentioned, there's no way you can just start saying, well, I'm gonna make little cuts and I'm gonna come up with $90,000. We won't, there's only one way to maybe make that kind of transition, and I don't think anybody wants to go there. That's my concern, right? And so we just, now if we had time to plan through this and look through that, like in 2022, then we can actually start looking at things and figuring out where that's coming from, right? Maybe make other reallocations. Hopefully that made sense.
Yes.
Okay, so we didn't, any other questions? Christian? So we didn't actually reach our goal, to have a document that would be signable, if you will. But if we can.
We're close.
We're
Closer than we were.
Yeah, I think if we can, of course, we can't do executive sessions, but, we will have conversations over the next few days to try to determine what a number is, and I can enlist the help of our financial people if that's something that you would desire. I'm not really sure what the question would be, other than how big of a loss can we take and still be okay. But if you will talk with your board, to reach a number, I think we've potentially negotiated in good faith to insert a number that is somewhere between 120 and 50, to get us there. I think it's obvious that all of us would like to continue this relationship, we want it to happen. I think all of us see the value that the partnership brings.
It doesn't necessarily have to be between 50 and 120, it could be 120. That's
Preferred.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Especially this year.
Yeah, no, just, yeah.
I agree with Jamie.
Just make it cool. Everybody's back.
Okay, so we can definitely look at what the 2020 payment would be, the 2021 payment would be.
Yeah, it could be two different amounts.
And work on potentially like an estimate for 2022.
And we have some time, I mean, really 2022, we should have we ought to make a good faith partnership to come to some kind of understanding by at least July, because in August, we're hot and heavy into putting that budget together, right? And so maybe June, July timeframe, we ought to make sure that we're talking and discussing what that number might be. I'm gonna go at.
Okay, any final things?
No.
Chief Stoermer, anything else?
No.
Board members?
We need a motion to table this discussion.
Chris, thank you for your help.
Yeah.
I'll make a
motion to table.
Okay, take a motion to table the conversation, made by James, seconded by Glenn. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Motion, being no other business to come before the board, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Jamie, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Thanks, everyone, have a good evening.